Welcome to the House of Truth. Last week we started a new series about how congregations should be organized according to the Bible, the Book of Truth. Not necessarily how people have organized them today. And we've been looking at different positions and stuff. But in the midst of that, I see the need to address another problem people have. We'll get back to we looked at elders last week, and we'll get back to we'll look at the other offices and the qualifications and so on and so forth. But first, I feel like we need to address this issue here of equal opportunity. Because equal opportunity is not really available often in congregations. It's been said that Sunday morning is the most segregated time in America. And I would dare say, for those of us who keep the Sabbath is no better among those who keep the Sabbath by and large. You go to congregations, and there's one predominant ethnic group, whether it be Jewish or African American or European American or something else. And sometimes you'll go into a congregation that's got somewhat of a mix. But let's say it's for example 20%, say 30% African American and 70% European American. But you look at these different positions that are filled. That we're going to talk about. That's in the structure of how congregations be set up according to the Book of Truth. And what you find is often, like in my example, and I found it's true if it's reversed. If you go to a congregation it doesn't really matter. If you got an ethnic group that say at the 70% or more makes it the congregation, you end up with the same problem. Because, well, the board in those kind of positions, these boards aren't even really biblical, but let's say elders, they vote in elders. Well, the problem is the 70%, because they're voting, will tend to vote for people of their own ethnic group most of the time. So what you end up with is you end up with 30% of your congregation is of some minority ethnic group. And I've been in congregation that minority is European Americans and the majority is African Americans, okay? It doesn't really matter it's not really about a particular ethnic group or race, if you want to use the word race or skin color or whatever. It's about people in general. They tend to vote for people who are like themselves. So what happens is you don't get proper representation of the minority, whatever that minority happens to be. It's a predominantly Gentile congregation. And there'll be some Jewish people in there, and let's just say they're Jewish believers, and they're just meeting. And let's say they're meeting on the Sabbath. Now there you have a weird situation because some places, if you got Jewish people at the beginning, some of them will exalt that and make it sound like everyone has to be Jewish to be up there. So then you have really a minority filling all the positions. But other than that, if people just vote, the majority ethnic group ends up filling all the positions often. And, often what happens historically, what's happened is like African Americans have went off and made their own denominations, their own congregations. And you might go into a little town. It's really being more effective. It's not a lot of people, a lot of believers there be more effective. They had one congregation, they can get a lot more done, but they can't because the majority ethnic group will not give the minority ethnic group equal opportunity. But this is not God's way. It's not the way of the Bible. It's not the way of Yeshua, Jesus. And we're going to look at what God's word says about equal opportunity. Because these things ought not to be, my brothers, as the word would say. And we're going to begin with this equal opportunity where it began in Genesis with a man named Abram. we pick up the story here in Genesis chapter 12, verses 2 through 4. And I will make you a great nation and bless you and make your name great, and you shall be a blessing. And I'll bless them that bless you and curse him that curses you. And in you shall all the families of the earth be blessed. So Abraham departed as the Lord spoke to him, and Lot went with him. And Abram was 75 years old when he departed out of Haran. Okay, now notice who's God, who's the Lord, Yahweh, Yahuwah, however you wish to say it, however you wish to pronounce that name, Yahweh. Truth is, there's 512 different possible ways that could be pronounced. We don't actually know, and we won't know till Messiah comes. But however you like, we make this with just Abram. But notice the inclusiveness of the entire world in this agreement, in this covenant. Now, the condition was he had to leave, and we'll talk about that. But there's the benefit if Abraham keeps up his end, and that's what we're going to focus on. I'm going to do a series on the patriarchs down the road, and we'll get into some more details about the rest of it. But for right now, we want to focus on this part. The whole families of the earth is to be blessed. Now, all the earth. So this covenant affects the entire human race. So what's the opportunity for the human race to get on this blessing? Blessing Abraham. In particular, that great nation that'll come out of him, which we'll talk about. Because remember, Abram is later changed to Abraham, and we looked at this before. 22 ethnic groups come out of Abraham. Remember the word nation. It's goy in Hebrew. It's translated as ethnos in Greek, and it's ethnos is is the Greek used in the New Testament, which we get the word ethnic group from. 22 nations come from Abraham, but there's a great nation in particular. And so especially that great nation. So how do we get, so everyone has equal opportunity to be blessed by the Lord who created all the human race, or be cursed by the Lord. And it's depending, and they decide based on how they treat Abram at this time. But we're going to see the great nation is going to get defined for us, and this is going to get expounded a little bit, made a little clearer as we go along. Now we're going to jump forward to Genesis chapter 27, verses 29 through 30. Let people serve you, and nations bow down to you. Be Lord over your burden. Let your mother's sons bow down to you. Cursed be everyone that curses you, and blessed be he that blesses you. And it came to pass, as soon as Isaac made it into blessing Jacob, that Jacob was yet scarce gone out of the presence of Isaac his father, that Esau his brother came in from his hunting. Okay, so this covenant got passed down through Abraham to Isaac, and Isaac has now passed it on to his son Jacob. Yachab, which literally means hill of God. But that's another story. We'll talk about that in the patriarchs. But notice Yachab here is now the one that's been blessed. And what's the rule? Remember the entire human race has equal opportunity to be blessed or cursed on how they treat Jacob, who later his name is changed to Israel. Now we're going to jump way ahead to Numbers chapter 24, verses 8 through 9. God brought him forth out of Egypt, and he has at war the strength of a unicorn. He shall eat up the nations of his enemies, and shall break their bones and pierce them through with his arrows. He crouched, he lay down as a lion, as of a great lion. Who shall stir him up? Blessed is he that blesses you, and cursed is he that curses you. Okay, who's the him that was brought out of Egypt? Not Jacob, even though this is Balaam speaking. Remember, Balaam said he could only speak the words that God put in his mouth. He was a real prophet of God, and we talked to them before. He was a real prophet of God who turned from righteousness, and as a result was destroyed. And we're warned that if we too turn from righteousness, we too will be destroyed. We're warned that in the Brit Hadashah, the New Testament. And Balaam's our example of what not to do. But he was a real prophet of God. And what does real prophet of God say? and him they brought forth out, even like says Jacob, he's talking about the people of Israel. They're the ones who were brought out of Egypt. And this is while they're in the wilderness, what's called numbers, because there's a sense of the beginning and the end of it. It's why they came with that name, numbers. In Hebrew, it's midbar, and it literally means in the wilderness. So while they're in the wilderness, what's the rule now? He that blesses this nation, Israel, that great nation that was referred to Abram, will be blessed. And he that curses that great nation, Israel, will be cursed by God. Blessed by God, cursed by God. And who has this opportunity? Everyone. It's equal opportunity. And remember, when we looked at Abraham, it said all the families of the earth. Well, so not as every ethnic group, as a group, have a chance to be blessed or cursed, but someone go contrary to the ethnic group as well. Meaning like the Canaanites, Rahab sheltered the spies, for an example. And they made a covenant with her, and because they clung to Israel and blessed Israel, they were spared and became part of the people of Israel, which we'll discuss later, and so on and so forth. And so even the Canaanites as a group were cursed for cursing Israel, those individuals among them were blessed. And Uriah the Hittite's another example. The Hittites were cursed as an ethnic group, but Uriah the Hittite clung to God. We talked about that before. And because of that, he clung to Israel, was a friend to David. He blessed Israel, so God blessed him. So it's an equal opportunity. Even if your ethnic group is all going the wrong direction, you have the opportunity as an individual to go the right direction. And the reverse is true as well. Even if your ethnic group is going the right direction, you as an individual have the opportunity to go the wrong direction. It's equal opportunity all the way down to the individual level. And by the way, this works for Jewish people as well. What if a Jewish person curses someone that's become part of the people of Israel? And we'll look at what that means in detail, because it's a lot more expansive than just the descendants of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. But what if they do? They too will be cursed. Therefore, they need to bless their brethren so that the blessing of Abraham will continue on them. And they must be careful not to curse. And there's many examples of this in the Bible. Like there were people in Israel. There were like a Ahithophel cursed David by telling his son, like advising his son on how to overthrow David. It would have been successful if his son listened to him. But as a result, the curse came upon Ahithophel. Even though he was a Jew, David was God's anointed. But even it's not that. There's other examples where the king's anointed, but the kings actually got cursed for treating a commoner, cursing a commoner who was among these people. You're a king of the Jews, king of Israel. They also were cursed. So this is not limited to Gentiles. This business works. Everyone has equal opportunity to be blessed or cursed based on how they treat the Jewish people, including the Jewish people. Now we're going to continue on in Genesis chapter 17, verses 10 through 13. And we're going to look at another area of equal opportunity. So we're going to start here, again, Genesis chapter 17. We're going to start in verses 10 through 13. This is my covenant, which you shall keep between me and your seed after you. Every man child among you shall be circumcised. You shall circumcise the flesh of your foreskin. It shall be a token of the covenant betwixt you and me. He is the 8 days old shall be circumcised among you. Every man child in your generations. He is born in the house or brought with money of any stranger which is not of your seed. He is born in your house and he is bought with your money, must needs be circumcised. And my covenant shall be in your flesh for an everlasting covenant. Okay, circumcision is the sign that you've entered this covenant. And talked about recently, there was an attempt to uncircumcise, but you can't really uncircumcise. You just kind of make it look like you were. Kind of hide your circumcision. So it's in there for, it's pretty much it's one and done. Now, what's the rule? So everyone who's circumcised is in this covenant is now part of what? The household of Abraham. And the household of Abraham, so is for what? Not just his seed. He is born in a house, or by the way, which is not of your seed, not just his physical descendants, but those born in the house could be for whatever reason. They don't have to be necessarily. They could be in servitude. Biblical servitude is very different than American slavery. And I'll explain that in detail in a future lesson. But you're considered part of the household. So there's an opportunity, even if someone became a well, I'm gonna say the word slave here for the moment, just to give you the ideal, a little bit more clear, but came into biblical servitude or biblical slavery to Abraham, but they're not from his descendants. They're going to be counted as his descendants if they're circumcised. So there's equal opportunity for anyone who encountered Abraham to come into his house. Because notice it's not just those bought with money, but he is born in anyone else that's in the house as well, perhaps through some other arrangement. But it doesn't count foreigners and those who are hired because they're temporary. They always become part of the house. Once become part of the household of Abraham could do so by being circumcised. Now this ideal is continued and clarified for us in Exodus chapter 12, verses 48 through 49. When a stranger shall sojourn with you and keep the Passover of the Lord, all his males be circumcised, and them come near and keep it. And he shall be as one as born in the land, for no uncircumcised person shall eat of it. No one law shall be to him that is homeborn, to him that is strangers, that into the stranger that sojourn among you. Okay, remember, what's the stranger? Well, not of your seed, or not more generally, it's not of your ethnic group. So if there's some of not your ethnic group, and they want to keep the Passover of the Lord. Now, mind you, this is after the deliverance from Egypt, when God's giving instructions about future Passovers. And they want to keep these future Passovers. What's the rule? All their males have to be circumcised. And then what? They're going to be counted as if they were born in the land. They're now have become part of the people of Israel. And it's equal opportunity for every stranger. Now, how does that work for women, you might wonder? Well, women, of course, there's this mutilation people call female circumcision. They practice in some places like Africa or something, which is not, that's Satan's counterfeit here, right? The whole point of circumcision is the seed. The man carries the seed, and it passes through the sign of the covenant. When the man goes into a woman, so she can conceive. Okay. So it's the man that has the seed. That's why the circumcision there for the man. So the deal is, a stranger, someone that's living among you, but it's not part of your ethnic group. But if they get circumcised, they become part of your ethnic group. And it's equal opportunity. And notice, it's one law for him that's homeborn and a stranger. There's one law. It's equal opportunity. If someone with the right ancestor, who's an actual descendant of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, is not circumcised, then they are not to keep the Passover of the Lord. We talked about this. We talked about this recently. That you might think, well, what about believers who aren't circumcised? The main thing when you're giving this Passover is about the lamb. The whole congregation is to kill the lamb at evening. The whole congregation is to roast the lamb, to eat the lamb. The bitter herbs, the bread and the wine are side dishes. The lamb's the main thing because that represents Messiah. So as we saw, as we saw with what people call communion, the unleavened bread and the wine is there. Messiah is your Passover lamb. And we'll go into that a little bit more, but we're talking about eating a physical lamb, in particular this physical ceremony that represents this greater truth. You must be physically circumcised. Whether you're Jew or Gentile, you can't do it. And with that comes responsibility. We'll just talk about that. It's not just a matter of just being circumcised, you can keep Passover. Now, we're going to see this put into practice here in Esther chapter 8, verses 16 through 17. And the Jews had light and gladness and joy and honor. In every province and every city, wherever the king's command and decree came, the Jews had joy and gladness and feast and a good day. And many people of the land became Jews, for the fear of the Jews fell upon them. Okay, remember, the covenant was I will bless those that bless you and curse those that curse you. I will bless the people of Israel, those who bless people of Israel, curse those that curse the people of Israel. Well, what went on, without giving you the whole Megillah, what went on previous to this was there had been a decree given to exterminate the Jews. Esther intervened on their behalf, who was a Jew, but married to the king. And the king issued another decree so the Jews could stand and defend themselves. And now people would say the king's on the Jews' side. So that, and they realize whoever's against the Jews is under a curse. So they are now going to bless the Jews. And we talked about this when I talked about Purim in my recent episode at that time. But the short version of it is, some took this further and they actually became Jews. How could they become Jews? Because they changed the many people in the land. Remember, if you read the book of Esther, the Persians are all about diversity. This is a mixed group of people. The lands are not just Persians; they're Greeks, they're Egyptians, they're the Medes. The Medes are related. And at this time, Ashkenaz lived inside the Persian Empire. That's the progenitor of the Germans. I mean, it's people of every hair color and eye color and skin color you can imagine. And they don't have that ancestry, but they became Jews because through this equal opportunity of circumcision. But becoming a Jew means taking on all the responsibilities, not just being circumcised. Circumcision shows you entered this covenant to be the special part of the special group, and with that you have to keep all the law, as we talked about before, and we'll discuss again a little later. So Exodus chapter. So far we've seen under the law, meaning the Torah, there's equal opportunity under the law, which is what in America we say equal opportunity under the law. Well, this was God's ideal first. Under his law, there was equal opportunity. Anyone could get in the blessing of Abraham by at least blessing Abraham and his descendants of Abraham, particularly the Jewish people. Anyone had equal opportunity to become part of the Jewish people through circumcision and taking on everything that entails. Now we're going to look at some more examples of equal opportunity under the law here. Exodus 9, 18 through 21. And behold, tomorrow about this time I will cause it to rain a very grievous hell, which has not been in Egypt since the foundation thereof even unto now. And send now therefore, and gather your cattle, all that you have in the field, and upon every man and beast which shall be found in the field shall not be brought home. The hell shall come down upon them, and they shall die. He that feared the Lord of the Lord among the servants of Pharaoh made his servants and his cattle flee into the houses. They regard not the word of the Lord, left his servants and cattle in the field. Okay, so this is out of the 10 plagues, it's number 7, and it's always been kind of my favorite because of this. Because some of the Egyptians begin to catch on. Because notice, it's not, now notice, yes, this instructions are given to the people of Israel, but they told, but the servants of Pharaoh heard it as well, and word got out. Because not every Egyptian was an oppressor of every Israelite, of the Israelites, and we'll see that clear as we come in. Remember, bless those that bless you, curse those that curse them. Well, the Israelites warned them, and word just got out. And notice, those who feared the Lord, their cattle servants were spared. Those who did not, and what's fear mean here? Fear the word of the Lord means they obeyed the commandments. They were afraid to go against God, afraid to disobey him, because they believed, they had faith that if they disobeyed him, the penalty for disobedience, which was death in this case, for their beasts, their servants, would come upon them. So there's no fearing God in not obeying his word. Okay, those who do not obey his word are what? They do not regard the word of the Lord. If either you fear the word of the Lord or you don't, but there's equal opportunity for everyone to do either one of those things. So there was equal opportunity for all the people, everyone in Egypt, to fear God and put the word got out, to fear God and protect their cattle. And those or not fear God, not regard what he said, and lose their cattle. It was equal opportunity for everyone. We're looking at some more. Now we're looking at another example of this. Now we're back in the wilderness in Numbers 21, verses 6 through 9. And the Lord sent fiery serpents among the people, and they bit the people, and much people of Israel died. Therefore came the people to Moses and said, "We have sinned, for we have sinned against the Lord, against you. Pray in the Lord, take away the serpents from us." And Moses prayed for the people. And the Lord said unto Moses, "Take you a fiery serpent, and set it upon a pole, and make it come to pass, everyone that is bitten, that we look upon it shall live." And Moses made a serpent of brass, and put on a pole, and it came to pass that if a serpent had bitten any man, when he beheld the serpent of brass, he lived. So, okay, so that's the people. We're going to discuss now I'm going to discuss the people, and much people of Israel, okay, died. And if we are looking at the people of Israel, is not limited to the physical ancestors, the physical descendants of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, but also could include those who became part of that people, who become part of that people through circumcision as well. And they would be counted that they were born. And it could also include people who weren't circumcised, who were living among them as strangers. So strangers that sojourn among you. So whether physical descendants of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob or not, if they've all sinned, so we've all sinned and fell short of the glory of God. This word fiery doesn't mean they were on fire and catching everything on fire they went on, but it refers to their bite being very painful and, of course, poisonous. It bit you, it died. You died. It was a very painful bite that died. And the Maltese viper, that like the one that bit Paul was known for that characteristic as well. And another viper that lives, that's related to it, that lives not far away, still has that characteristic. So there's equal opportunity. Everyone's fallen short. Everyone's sinned. Everyone's been bit. Everyone's under the sins of death. But everyone has the opportunity to look on that brass serpent and live. And that serpent, of course, is a picture of Satan, but in sin. And what's it been done? It's been nailed to a pole. It's a picture of Messiah who was nailed to a cross. So there's equal opportunity for Jew, Gentiles living among them, and people who become Jews. I should say this way: descendants of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, the people of Israel, including those who became Jews through circumcision, and those living among them who have blessed them in some manner, so they're living among them still. Equal opportunity to live or die, depending on whether or not they obey the instruction to look at the serpent, the brazen serpent. Now we're going to go to Deuteronomy 11, chapter 11, verses 26 through 28, where God is just going to spell this thing out for us. I mean, we're going to be certain we're rightly interpreting this. Behold, I set before you this day a curse, a blessing, and a curse. A blessing if you obey the commandments of the Lord your God, which I command you this day. And a curse if you obey not the commandments of your Lord your God, but turn aside out of the way which I command you this day, to go after their gods which you have not known. All right, so as we've seen two examples of this. The blessing comes from obeying the commandments. The curse comes from disobeying the commandments. If you fear God, you obey his commandments, and you get blessed. If you don't regard him, you don't take him serious, you break his commandments anyways, you get cursed. Everyone of every ethnic group has an equal of every nation, every skin color, every gender, every age, young, old, male, female, African American, European American, Native American, non-American, citizen, legal alien, illegal alien, whatever the status, or totally outside the U.S. It's equal opportunity for everyone to either be blessed or cursed, depending on whether you choose to obey or not. Equal opportunity under the law, the Torah, God's law. Now we're going to look at Exodus chapter 12, verses 21 through 23. Then Moses called for the elders of Israel and said to them, draw out and take you a lamb according to your families and kill the Passover. You shall take a bunch of hyssop and dip in the blood that is in the basin, strike it in the lintel and the two side posts with the blood that is in the basin, and none of you shall go out at the door at his house till morning. And I will pass through to smite the Egyptians where he sees the blood upon the lintel, the two of you, the two side posts, and the Lord will pass over the door and suffer the destroyer to not come to your house to smite you. Okay. Now we're looking at another example of equal opportunity. How even Passover was equal opportunity, and you'll see what I mean here in a minute. But now I want you to notice, first of all, the Lord gave Moses the instructions, who is now given to Israel, and the instructions again, of course, about putting the blood, he's going to go through the entire land of Egypt. And he's going to smite the Egyptians. Smite every door except those who do not have the blood on there. Now, what's going to happen to Israel if they do not put the blood on there? Are they going to pass because they're Jewish? No. The rule is the blood of the lamb will keep you from being destroyed. He doesn't say, yeah, hey, you're Jewish, you don't need to do this. This is for someone else. If you're Jewish, if you're Jewish, and I'm going to explain that word Jewish a little bit later in a little more detail in a moment. But if you're part of the people of Israel and you want to be protected, you have to do this. Every person among the people of Israel has equal opportunity to obey or not obey, to protect their household or not protect their household. Now we're going to continue on in Exodus 12. In Exodus 12, we'll go down to verses 28 and 30 and see the results of this and how Israel responded. And the children of Israel went away and did as the Lord commanded Moses and Aaron, so did they. And it came to pass that at midnight the Lord smote all the firstborn of the land of Egypt, When the firstborn of Pharaoh sat on his throne, and the firstborn of the captives in the dungeon, and all the firstborn of the cattle. And Pharaoh rose up in the night, he and all his servants and all the Egyptians, and there was a great cry in Egypt, for there was not a house where there was not one dead. Okay, so note, first I want you to notice all of Israel did this. So if all of Israel did this, what? All of them were passed over. He and all the Egyptians did not. At least on the surface. And well, you'll see what I mean by that in a minute. So they were not passed over. Why? Because they were Egyptians? Because they didn't have the blood of the lamb on their door. That might look like on the surface, you might say, well, they had no opportunity. God only told Moses, and Moses only told the elders of Israel. Well, let's look at the rest of the story and look at that little detail, this little miss that shows there really was equal opportunity under the law, the Torah. We're going to go down the verses. We're going to continue in Exodus 12. We're going to go down to verses 36 through 38. And the Lord gave people favor in the sight of the Egyptians, so they lent him such things as they required, and they spoiled the Egyptians. And the children of Israel journeyed from Ramses to Sukkot, about 600,000 men, 600,000 on foot that were men besides children. And a mixed multitude went up with them, and flocks and herds, even very much cattle. Now, wait a minute. I thought all the Egyptians died and were in mourning and thrusting Israel out. Well, notice the Egyptians, of course, an ethnic group, but the only people, not everyone living in Egypt, first of all, is an Egyptian. Egypt was the most prosperous country on earth at the time. It was the powerhouse of the day. It was like America of that day. It's a place everyone wanted to immigrate to. And they had trade as far over as India. In India, like Indochina, people there in contact with China. It's possible even Chinese people were living in Egypt. And definitely people from India for certain, Arabia, because the route from India was across the Arabian Sea to Arabia, then across the Red Sea over to Egypt, all the way down to Africa, down to Anzia, which is where Tanzania is, modern day Tanzania is today. There was trade down with the Spice Islands in particular, way across North Africa. Put the rest of Africa north. That's Africa, a part of North Africa that is that's west of Egypt, was called Put in the back of those days. The Libyans and so on and so forth came from them. We talked about ethnogenesis in a previous one, how an ethnic group can create new ethnic groups. New ethnic groups come out of an old one. So, and definitely the Sabaeans, Ethiopians, and going up. Remember, Egypt's northern border is the Mediterranean Sea. They have trade over the Mediterranean Sea. We know from the Book of Job. That's the Book of Job. We know from Balaam's words that they already knew about they were in contact with the Italians, the Greeks. The Hebrew slaves and others may have provided the labor to build the pyramids, but it was the Greeks who provide the math and science to build them. Okay, and the Greeks and what's today Turkey, and there was people just basically of every ethnic group in Egypt, along from the Black Sea down the coast of the Black Sea. There was a trade route that went to Egypt as well, and this included people like Scythians or Russians. So you basically had people of every hair of every skin color, every hair color, every eye color, all kinds of ethnic groups in Egypt besides the Egyptians. Well, how come this group isn't out there mourning if someone died in every house? Because they applied the blood to their door. It was equal opportunity. And how would they hear? Moses told Israel, but Israel told other people. They had friends. Those who blessed Israel were blessed with this knowledge that they could be saved by applying the blood of the lamb to the wood. And so they were also saved. So even in the Passover, and in his terrible judgment, there was equal opportunity. And notice at this point, this is before in 38. Remember in 48, where God says you have to be from now on. There was no instruction to be circumcised for the initial one, for the memorial of this event, because that's what Passover is. It's a memorial of this event. Then you had to be circumcised. So many of this mixed multitude weren't circumcised at this point, but yet they still went up with Israel. So there was equal opportunity. Those who blessed Israel were blessed. Those who cursed him were cursed, as God had said to Abram. Equal opportunity. Now we're looking at another area of equal opportunity under the law, the Torah, and how it applies, because this is what the Bible, the book of truth, says, advocates and commands us to do, for that matter. Deuteronomy 10:17-18, or Davarim if you prefer Hebrew, which means the words, because it's all one giant speech of Moses mostly. For the Lord your God is God of gods and is God of gods and Lord of lords, a great God, a mighty and a terrible, which regards not persons nor takes reward. He does execute the judgment of the fatherless and the widow, and loves the stranger and giving them food and raiment. Okay, first thing I want you to notice about God here is he does not regard people. I don't care who you are. I don't care what your ancestry is. I don't care what your ethnic group is. I don't care how smart you are, how dumb you are, how talented you are, or how little talent you may think you have. God is simply not impressed, and he does not make a difference to him one way or the other. He does not regard people. He made them all, and none of them have him in awe. Okay. So because of that, he executes the judgment of the fatherless and the widow. I'm going to explain that. He brings justice to them. Now, the problem is, if someone's fatherless, whether it's because their father died, or perhaps their parents divorced, and their mothers, and there's no father in their life, they're at a terrible disadvantage. And people will take advantage of them. And as my own case, I grew up divorced. God sent some people in my life who helped, but none of them could stand up for me like a father could. And because of this, I was taken advantage of often in the restaurant where I was a dishwasher. There'd be a school event, and I noticed all the kids who had fathers, they tell me, I'd ask the school event, I want off, please. It's a Friday. I know it's your busiest day, but I want off because I can go to the school event. And they'd be like, basically, no, you cannot have off. Don't show up, you're fired. But I noticed all the kids who had fathers, they didn't show up to work. And their fathers had went to the manager and just said to him, hey, my kid's going to this event. And the kid didn't have to, I was out trying to earn money to help my family and things like that. Well, these kids were earning money. They were saving up for a car or just trying to have money to have spending money or something like that, So their father was taking care of them and providing for them. So these people took advantage of people like myself, and it's just not uncommon. It's not just fathers, it's also widows. Why? The widow doesn't have a husband, doesn't have a provider. And, this can also apply to a woman. She may not be taking a widow, but say her husband's in prison. But a woman that's at a disadvantage like that, particularly if she has children, again, employers will treat her differently because they believe they can get away with treating her in a way they cannot get away with some of the husband. The woman's husband might say, hey, she's just earning some money for us. She's just, this is side money so we can go have vacation or to get some extra things or whatever the case is. But you're not going to treat my wife that way, and they'll either stop the treatment or the wife will go work elsewhere. And they're aware of this and they will not even try to take advantage of her. But my mother was in this situation and, again, they took advantage of her. But what happened? Once I came to the house of truth, once I surrendered my life to Messiah, put him in control, God became my avenger. That restaurant, I left to join the Air Force. I came back a few months later. When I left, it had been the number one restaurant in their chain. When I came back, it was out of business. God was my judge. He executed judgment because now I've joined his family. Those who cursed me were cursed, and those who blessed me are blessed. And even if you're not in the covenant, even if you're not in this family, God is still looking over the fatherless and the widow. And if you take advantage of them, he is going to bring judgment on you. And we need not be taking it. And the thing about the fatherless is also is sometimes they don't know how to behave if people have come from a broken home compared to kids who had both parents and lived in a I don't know what they call them blended a nuclear family, which is really God's ideal. Okay, if they grew up in a nuclear family, just from being raised a certain way, now do things that people who basically have to raise themselves and their parents weren't ever home or whatever, which can even happen in a nuclear family if both parents are out working all the time. But those kids who've been raised right have a real advantage. But we're not to look down on those who maybe don't know always how to behave socially as they should. Because we look at the qualifications for an elder last week, and that's not one of them. Okay. It's not about how the family they grew up in treated them. It's about how they act as a father. Okay. Do they run the household in the ways of the Lord? And they themselves may be learning while teaching. And the same about a widow. Her voice is just as valuable as anyone else's. She's not to be disregarded and treated different, and really comes down to the fear of man, like the boss I was telling you about. They were afraid to go. I didn't have a man they could see protecting me, or my mother in some cases didn't, and they were afraid to go against those who did. They didn't want to go against the woman's husband. They were afraid to go against those high schoolers' parents. But they did not fear God, who they could not see. And he's the one they should have feared the most. Now, so God's equal opportunity includes those from messed up families, not just from those from dysfunctional families, not just those who have a normal nuclear family that's working the way God said. And notice, loves the stranger. And what's a stranger again? Someone of a different ethnic group. To provide them food and raiment. Okay, so how does he love them in a practical way? Now, when I was in the Air Force, I came across some European Americans who said this about African Americans. They said African Americans act like we owe them something. But the truth is, Most of them were from the South. And the truth is, European Americans do owe them something. Now, some European Americans, like my wife's father, he didn't even come over till after the Civil War was over, after slavery was over, all that business. Heck, some have immigrated over here, in 20 years ago. And their whole attitude often is, well, we weren't here. We didn't have anything to do with that. No. If you come somewhere to get the benefits of the place, you also have the responsibilities of the place. The fact is, you are living on Native American land. And you do owe them something for living on their land. And while you owe them food and raiment, you owe them the opportunity to take care of themselves. This is what I've heard. I've had African American friends who said, well, where's what happened to our 40 acres and a mule? Well, the historical background is that was Lincoln's ideal. And what Lincoln wanted to do was, after slavery was in it, was divide those huge plantations into 40-acre lots, give each African American family, freed slave, a 40-acre lot, and you then give them a mule. So what's he giving them? He's giving them means to take care of themselves, and so they don't have to be dependent on anyone else anymore. Because that's part of a problem of a slave. A slave's dependent on the master for everything. It's a bad thing both ways, because eventually the masters don't know how to do anything, and they actually become slaves themselves in a sense, because they don't know how to do anything, and they depend on slaves to take care of everything for them. And when the slave force goes, like happened to the Roman Empire, you go into a dark age, because all the people that knew everything, you farmed it out to the slaves, and the slaves have all left. And so there's this big drain of knowledge and skill that leaves you, because all the Romans knew how to do by that point was bossing their people around, basically knew how to be fed and entertained. Which, unfortunately, I'm speaking about a lot of Americans anymore. It's all you know how to do is be fed and entertained. But Abraham Lincoln was wanting to do what, though? Give equal opportunity. And his whole thought was if we do not give African Americans equal opportunity to make a living, then they're going to become government dependent, or they're going to be forced to become criminals to feed their families and things of that nature. A whole slew of problems that come from not doing this. So yes. I mean, look, my father's family was from the North. They fought to free slaves, but that is not in the obligation. You're in this country. We have an obligation to everyone in it, not just European Americans. Not just people with a certain skin color, or really all skin color is the thickness of your dermis. The thinner your dermis is, the darker your skin. Because your melanin sites are getting more sunlight. But the dermis is also what creates vitamin D. So you have to have more sunlight, and more sunlight's getting to the dermis, because a thinner dermis means you got to be out in the sun longer to create the same amount of vitamin D. And if you got thicker dermis, you actually got to have less sunlight, and less sunlight actually penetrates to your melanin sites to begin with. I mean, being divided over thickness of dermis is so stupid. I can hardly put it in words. But the fact is, we owe everyone in this country deserves an opportunity to not be government fed, as Lecrae said about himself growing up. One of my favorite people, Christian rapper Lecrae. I totally feel him on that, because people deserve an opportunity to be self-sufficient and not be dependent on the government, which is another form of slavery, by the way. People are dependent on the government. Keep voting in the people that will provide them benefits, who actually designed a system in the first place to keep them from being self-sufficient. It's a perpetual cycle. And the way to break it, with God's help, get out of it and quit being dependent on those people and quit voting for them. But equal opportunity is God's ideal, and that's what he demands. As we see, he does not regard people. But some people just do not get it, and Peter was one of them. And we're looking at this in Acts chapter 10, verses 34 through 35. Then Peter opened his mouth and said, of a truth, I perceive that God is no respecter of persons, but in every nation he fears him and works righteousness and is accepted with him. Peter finally gets this. We just looked at this. It literally says it in the Torah, spells it out for you. In case you're dense, just flat out says it. But Peter was so dense, he couldn't even get it when it was spelled out to him. He was with Yeshua, and Yeshua went to the Samaritans, and he stayed with them several days and ate with them and everything. And Peter, so ingrained with tradition from the rabbis, became so dense, so dull of hearing, so dull of understanding. They just could not get it until God performed a miracle with Cornelius. So spirit baptism was put upon Cornelius, who was uncircumcised. He was a God-fearer, but he was uncircumcised. He didn't worship idols, that's very apparent, but he was uncircumcised. And Peter's stinking thinking was, he has to be one of us, he has to be one of the people of Israel, has to at least get circumcised, become part of us, or he cannot, or it's just us and them, and there's no path in for them. But for whatever reason, some people can't get circumcised for some reason, for various reasons, perhaps. But God never said this. Peter, when Holy Spirit baptism occurs on Cornelius, and Peter knows it because Cornelius and those with him produce Holy Spirit sounds, which I talked about in my last two lessons, a couple lessons ago for Pentecost or Shavuot. He finally gets this, that what God himself had said plain as day in Deuteronomy. He is no respecter of persons. What does God do? Every ethnic group, he that fears him. Fears God means what? Obeys him. If you fear him, you work righteousness. You do what's right in God's eyes. You're accepted of him. This is why I say this. I looked 10 years at the matter of Jew versus Gentile, not continually, obviously, off and on. And I finally concluded this about it. It just doesn't matter. That's what God's saying here. So the word is telling us, it just doesn't matter. If you fear God and do what's right in his eyes, you're accepted of him. People get all tripped up because of the circumcision thing. But remember, if you're I'll get into this a little bit more detail a little bit later, but if you're circumcised, you're there to keep the whole law. What's that imply for believers? If you're not it means if you're not circumcised, you're not there to keep the whole law. And we'll expound upon that in a few minutes here. I've talked about this before, but we'll expound upon it again in a few minutes. God is not a respecter of persons. And he had this Jewish ideal, this stinking thinking from the rabbis, which Shaul, the Apostle Paul, whichever you prefer, addresses in Romans chapter 2, verses 6 through 11. Who are rendered to every man according to his deeds. To them who by patient continuance and well-doing seek for glory and honor and mortality, eternal life. But unto them who are contentious, do not obey the truth, and are not, but obey unrighteousness, indignation and wrath, laying tribulation and anguish upon every soul of man that does evil. Of the Jew first, and also of the Gentile. But glory and honor and peace to every man that works good, to the Jew first and also to the Gentile. For there is no respect of persons with God. With God, we looked at his law, it's equal opportunity under the law. Everyone that does what's right in his eyes is going to be blessed. Everyone who does what's wrong is going to be cursed. And this whole thing Paul's addressing in Romans chapter 2 is this whole ideal of predestination. The Jews had in their head, they were predestined because they were the physical descendants of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. The rabbis had got this ideal of predestination in Babylon, which came, and the whole ideal comes from idolatry. And I got a lesson called Predestination. I did a whole series on this that explains that in detail and shows it from Scripture. That every single passage people use to support this ideal of predestination, they're taking out of context. You often inside the very chapter they're in. But if you go out further, and maybe not there, but if you look out further inside the book they're in, like in Romans, Paul has an entire chapter devoted to dispelling the whole myth, the whole ideal of predestination, chapter 2. But then you got to consider the whole counsel of God. And you go back and look at where Paul quotes these places people use, and you go look at it in context, and you find the context Paul knew and understood. And it is nothing like this once saved, always saved predestination. I'm chosen, I can do whatever the heck I want. I'm gonna be okay. No, you cannot. Anyone that tells you that is a deceiver, as we've seen. 1 Corinthians chapter 6, verses 9 through 11, 9 through 10 says anyone that tells you those things is a deceiver. How does it work? It works equal opportunity. Now, and here's the whole thing, the Jew. What does it mean by Jew? Does that mean someone from the tribe of Judah? No. Jew is first used in the Torah. Actually, it's not even in the Torah. I'm sorry. The term Jew is first used in the Ketuvim, the writings, particularly the writings of history, about the people. It didn't even occur till after the United Kingdom of Israel under David and Solomon split into the kingdom of Judah in the south and Israel in the kingdom of Israel in the north. The people from the kingdom of Judah were called Jews. That's how it's translated. It's really literally Judeans, but it means you're from that kingdom. And as I've discussed before, and I'll perhaps show in more detail, I've shown it before, and I'll perhaps show it again in another future lesson. The people in the northern kingdom. Remember, the southern kingdom was just originally Judah. The kingdom's named after, and Benjamin. And of course, some of the tribe of Simeon and Levi, because the Simeon and Levi were scattered into cities, didn't have their own land, their own property, if you remember right. And some of them were in there as well. But what happened as time went on? The northern kingdom, those in those four tribes, and those who lived in Judah, who didn't want to be under God's law when you had the good kings enforcing it, they went north to Israel, the northern kingdom. The northern kingdom never obeyed God's law as a kingdom. The government never was corrupt from the beginning. The religious system was corrupt from the beginning. Well, those people who were up there, are those other 8 tribes, actually really 9, not counting them. Right, not counting Levi, then they count it. Those other tribes, Ephraim, Manasseh, Issachar, and so on and so forth, they migrated south to Judah. So you have all 12 tribes in both, representatives, members of both tribes in both countries after a while. So Jude does not mean a descendant of Judah from the tribe of Judah. Jew does not even mean a descendant of Israel. It means someone from Judea, who again we looked at this in the Torah before. The Torah allows for strangers to live among the Jews in Judea. If they're circumcised, they're counted as Jews, but they're not. They're still allowed to live there. So in the context where Paul's talking about, now it's talking about someone who's either a physical descendant of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, or someone who through circumcisions became one, or someone, and those are called the Ger Tzedekah, which means the righteous, which literally means righteous strangers. Although God said he becomes the firstborn, he didn't call him Ger at all, actually. And the Ger Tzedekah, in the Ger Teshab, those who we talked to them before could not go beyond the gate of separation, because they're not circumcised, but they are otherwise living. There are laws that apply to everyone, and the laws that apply to just those who get circumcised. They take on extra responsibilities, which we'll look at. All those are Jews, or counted as Jews. Now, if you worship idols, you're a Gentile. or formerly worshipped idols. So everyone else is Gentiles. Well, notice, remember, we talked about this from the beginning. The word goes from Moses to Israel to the Gentiles. The Jews get it first. They're going to be judged first, or they're going to be rewarded first. They're going to be punished first for disobedience. They're rewarded first for obedience. They're the Gentiles, and it's equal opportunity. Who is rewarded? Who's punished? Those who do not obey the truth, but rather obey unrighteousness. They're going to reap indignation, wrath, tribulation, and anguish. Who's going to be punished? Who's going to be rewarded? Well, those who obey the truth and obey righteousness, or don't obey unrighteousness. You're going to either obey the truth or you're going to obey righteousness. And those who obey the truth are going to get glory, honor, and immortality, eternal life. And there's just no respect of persons. It's equal opportunity under the law to be blessed or cursed. And because people are dense somewhat, we've seen this in the law, God has spoken to the prophets as well to even make this a little bit more clear. We're going to look here in Joel, chapter 2, Joel, or Yoel, if you want to go to Hebrew, chapter 2, verses 32. It shall come to pass, whoever shall call upon the name of the Lord shall be delivered. For in Mount Zion and in Jerusalem shall be deliverance, as the Lord has said. In the remnant whom the Lord shall call. Okay, now, the remnant's what? Remnant speaks of survivors, as opposed to deliverance, all right? Delivered. Who needs deliverance? Those who are being destroyed. So the Lord's going to call, and he's going to call them. But he's calling all of them. He has sent the prophets. Who's going to be delivered? Whoever calls back to him. Whoever calls on the name of the Lord. Now, in this context, Joel often, there'll be like a double fulfillment of prophecy, in a way, kind of a shallow fulfillment and a final fulfillment. And the final fulfillment is talking about the end of the tribulation, okay? And that's where it's going to occur in Mount Zion. When they say to Yeshua, blessed is he that comes in the name of the Lord. But notice it's equal opportunity. It doesn't say it's anyone who's in Zion and Jerusalem. It doesn't say anyone in Zion, Jerusalem with the right ancestry or of the right ethnic group. It's just whosoever. And now we're going to go to Acts chapter 2, verses 21 through 24, and see the initial shadowing application of this prophecy, this fulfillment. And it shall come to pass, whosoever shall call upon the name of the Lord shall be saved. Men of Israel, hear these words. Jesus of Nazareth, a man approved of God among you by miracles and wonders and signs, which God did by him in the midst of you, as you yourselves know. Him being delivered by the determinate counsel and foreknowledge of God, you have taken him by wicked hands, have crucified and slain, whom God has raised up, being loosed from the pains of death, because it is not possible it should be holden of it. Okay, whosoever. Does it say whosoever is the son of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob? No. Does it say whosoever is of this ethnic group, this Jewish ethnic group? No. Now, Paul's speaking to Jews at the time, that's who's there. But really, it's whosoever. And what does calling on the name of the Lord mean in this context? See, before they didn't know the name of the Lord. It's just the name of the Lord, but now we're told that name. And that name is Jesus of Nazareth. And how do we know he's him? He was approved of God by miracle signs and wonders. And remember, we looked at this a couple weeks ago. We talked about why the Jew requires a sign. Paul is not saying something bad about him or people have taken that like them stubborn Jews require a sign. God himself commanded it in Deuteronomy 13, the first 4 verses. He commanded, he said, he says, if someone comes to you and in the name of another God to draw you away from following my commandments, and even if a sign occurs to them, you're not to listen to them, but because they're trying to draw you away from keeping his commandments. Well, Yeshua, as we'll see in a moment here again very clearly, did not try to teach, did not come in the name of another God. He did not come to teach people to draw them away from the commandments of God in any shape, form, or fashion, as some people have accused him of. And they have bore false witness against him in that regard. And God repentance if you've done that. Because you need the forgiveness of God. You've borne false witness against the Son of God. If you say if he did away with the law. The second thing was, God says, if someone comes and speaks in my name, it'll be accompanied by a sign, or it could be something they say come to pass, or a sign, a wonder, or miracle signs or wonders, a sign. So Yeshua met all of these qualifications. Came in the name of the Lord, did not to bring people into obedience to his commandments, not away from them, and these miracles confirmed him. So now we know he's Messiah. So calling the name of the Lord means calling in the name of Yeshua, Jesus of Nazareth, Yahshua. We'll go with the Hebrew. Yeshua is actually Aramaic. Yahshua. Say it with me. Yahshua. Okay. So, and notice, now people have looked at this, and evil men like Martin Luther have looked at this and said, and said, Jews are Christ killers. I actually got that from the Catholics. Jews are Christ killers. As Peter's talking to the Jews and says, you've taken by wicked hands crucified and slain. Now remember, he's talking to a bunch of people who, most of them just over Pentecost weren't even there, a lot of the crowd. But of course, the ones who were. But the fact is, the Jews did not kill Messiah. I mean, technically speaking, the Romans drove it was Gentiles. Romans actually drove the spikes and did the flogging and everything, right? And they were like, but the Jews put them up to it and tricked them into it and don't file into it, blah, blah. No. As I said before, I killed Messiah, and so did you. Wicked hands, your sins made your hands wicked. Your hands, my hands, are the hands that drove the nails into his hands, and so are yours. Quit blaming the Jews for your sin. You are a Christ killer as much as anyone. But it didn't end with his death. God raised him up. He was raised for the justification of you as well. And the Jew first, as we've seen, then the Gentile. If you are not a part of the people of Israel, if you have not been circumcised and made part of that, or are not a descendant of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, it doesn't do with whether or not you're saved or not. You're just as guilty and responsible as they are. But you are also just as saved as they are. Because the blessing of Abraham has come upon all the families of the earth through his seed, the seed, singular, Messiah. It's equal opportunity for everyone. And Paul summarizes this up in Romans chapter 10, verses 11 through 13. For the scripture says, whosoever believes in him shall not be ashamed. For there is no difference between the Jew and the Greek. For the same Lord over all is rich unto all that call upon him. And whosoever shall call upon the name of the Lord shall be saved. There is no difference between Jew and Greek. And the reason why Greeks are used to the Gentile is because in that part of the world, the Greeks had overcome conquered it and assimilated everyone, but they could not, in the end, totally assimilate the Jews. The Maccabees, Hanukkah, that feast that Yeshua thought was so important. He walked 3 days, 2 or 3 days in the winter each way just to attend it, where he declared himself to be the light of the world and showed his dedication to the Father and to us, that he is the light of dedication. That Hanukkah represents him. He's the light of dedication. But everyone else took on this Greek culture, and it'd be like an overarching culture over all these other ethnic groups. Like in America, we're all under an American culture. European Americans are not Europeans. And I used to live in Greece, and when the Europeans come to the beach, I could be on the beach and I hear not anyone's language, not see them. They're all European Americans, the Europeans, both scantily clad, not inappropriately dressed, not leaving much to guess. And I could pick out the Americans from the Europeans from 200-300 yards. They could be wearing the same clothing. European Americans are not Europeans. We don't look the same. We don't act the same, and we surely don't think the same. Okay. African Americans are not Africans. I've had lots of African friends, and I've had African American friends. I'm surprised how many of them have never had harsha or tibs or peanut soup or otherwise anything else. They've never eaten with actual Africans, because African Americans are not Africans. They are more American than African. Whether they like this or not, it's the truth. And of course, the ultimate American is Native American. So much of American culture, from the way we dress to the food we eat to everything, originated with the Native Americans. Yes, they got some things from the Europeans, Americans, and the African Americans, but we got far more from them than what they got from us. Most people just don't recognize it. They don't realize all the contributions they made. Even something as simple as the ideal of digital information, where it's complex. Samuel Morse was the first to use electronic binary, telegraphs, dots and dashes. But where did he get the ideal from? Smoke signals from Native Americans. Long puffs, short puffs. It was the first long-distance binary communication system. So even the basis that computers are built upon actually has its origin in Native Americans. Not to mention the idea of our clothing, the material our clothing is made from, our food, and so many other things we got from Native Americans. In a lot of ways, they're the ultimate Americans, despite the way some of these immigrants who came into their land, European American or otherwise, may look down upon them. We came into their land, they didn't come into ours. Actually, well, I don't know if I should be 1/16 offended or something, but you know what I mean. There's no difference. It's equal opportunity under the law, God's law. Equal opportunity. So whoever's going to believes on him, regardless of your ancestry, male, female, age, young, old, you're not going to be ashamed, and you're going to be saved, because he's rich unto everyone. He doesn't run out of love and say, well, I just don't have enough love for people of that group over there. He made all those groups. He has love for every one of them. There is enough for you. Equal, if you'll take it and you'll obey him. Equal opportunity. Now we're going to address one last area of equal opportunity in the Book of Truth. And this ties in maybe perhaps the most directly into our discussion about positions inside congregations, and how these and we'll look at how these things should be fulfilled. Because I'm going to tell you this: the concept of voting, by and large, is not a biblical concept. There are cases where some votes were taken, but not for everything like we do in America. And so these positions were not meant to be filled by voting, which is part of the problem, as I discussed at the beginning. Now, I mentioned this earlier about this business about because this thing about circumcision throws some people in a fit. They're like, well, okay, they got to keep all these laws except for circumcision. I said this before: circumcision comes with other responsibilities. We're going to delve into that right now and look at what and look into what Yeshua himself had to say about this. Remember, this false accusation, he came to do away with the law. What did he say about it? Matthew 5:18 through 19. Verily I say to you that till heaven and earth pass away, not one jot or one tittle shall no wise pass from the law until all be fulfilled. Whosoever shall break the least of these commandments shall teach men so, he shall be called the least in the kingdom of heaven. Whosoever shall teach and do them, the same shall be called great in the kingdom of heaven. Okay, so first of all, when's the law going to pass away? When will a jot or tittle? That's not even the letters that make up the words of the law. That's the little parts that make up the letters, okay? Jots are little big things. Tittles are the long. They kind of look like if you want to think of them, it's like short sticks and long sticks, or short dots and long sticks or whatever that make up the. Not even the font's going to change. Okay, is what he's saying here. Till when? Heaven and earth pass. Till they're changed. That word's komoia in Greek. It means to change. It means the new heaven and the new earth. Look out your window. Heaven and earth are still here. He did not come to do away with the law. And anyone who told you that has bore false witness against him. He'll say, well, we're not under the law. And they misquote that from Paul. They do not look at the entire context, which we looked at recently. And I talked about this when I talked about the day after the Sabbath. Okay. Now Paul himself says, if you say you're not under the law, but under grace, does it give you a right to sin, which is transgression of the law according to the New Testament? No. He says, God forbid. He's not saying that you can transgress the law. He did not teach it. He was a champion of the Torah. When I got a lesson called that, as well as Messiah, Yeshua. But what does Yeshua say about the law? He says, notice there's two kinds of, there's least commandments. It also means there's greater commandments, weightier matters. Now, what's the purpose of these? Notice that the weightier commandments are not addressed here directly at this point. We talked about this again. You go look at my lesson the day after the Sabbath. You will find that these weightier commandments are things that keep you out of the kingdom of heaven or put you in the lake of fire. And there's 6 lists of these. And you look at those, all those lists, compare them to 10 commandments, and you find that 9 of the 10 commandments are in there. You know which one is not? Commandment number 4, the Sabbath. Why? It's part of these least commandments. Because it's the Sabbath, as we show, and I showed this in that lesson. It plainly says in the Torah, was to mark, yes, in the beginning, everyone kept the Sabbath. When Messiah reigns, the whole world's going to keep the Sabbath. But in the interim, between those two, is a sign that you're part of this ethnic group. If you're circumcised, you're there to keep the whole laws. You have to keep the Sabbath. You have to eat only clean food, so on and so forth. These are these least commandments. And what's he say about breaking these least commandments? That you're not in the kingdom? No. You're not. You're least in the kingdom. And what's that mean? I got a lesson where I show this very plainly. The kingdom within the kingdom. When Yeshua rules, he's going to be King of Kings and Lord of Lords. King of Kings. Who's these other kings? Well, Israel is a kingdom. You go read the Nevi'im, the prophets, and you'll see this. Israel will be a kingdom, and all other nations have to bring tribute to it. And I show this very plainly in my lesson, the kingdom within the kingdom. And I show it, and I show it in some other lessons about the reign of Messiah. Some of my lessons about the reign of Messiah when he's on this earth. And these nations, so either you can be in that nation that's being the tribute brought to you, being brought to, or the ones bringing the tribute without controversy. The king being part of the kingdom that's receiving the tribute makes you greater than those who are in the kingdoms that are bringing the tribute. And who's that? It's the people of Israel living in the land of Israel. That whose borders are plainly laid out in I believe it's Ezekiel. I'll just call him Ezekiel. I won't use the Hebrew name, but Ezekiel. So that's going to put, if you teach those and do those things, you're going to be great in the kingdom of heaven, because you're going to be in there, and and in the eternal kingdom, there's that wall that surrounds where the city comes down, has the 12 tribes of Israel written on it. That's the borders of Israel in the eternal kingdom. So the Messianic kingdom and in the eternal kingdom, if you keep the least commandments, are going to be part of that kingdom. The kingdom above all our kingdoms, the kingdom within the kingdom, within the universal kingdom. If you do not break that if you break those and teach others to do so, you're still going to be in the kingdom of heaven, notice, but you're going to be the least. You're going to be in one of those other kingdoms. Now, you can either you can become part of the people of Israel and be part of that kingdom, but you got to keep the weightier matters of the law too, or you're not getting the kingdom at all. Remember that. That's important. By keeping these least commandments or not, you have equal opportunity. It has nothing about your ethnic group, about your ancestry, about your skin color, about your gender, about your age, or anything else your family situation, your marital status, you name it. You get to pick. It's equal opportunity under God's law, equal opportunity to be part of that greater kingdom. But that's not the only thing there's equal opportunity for you for. Because in those kingdoms are positions inside each kingdom. And there's opportunity of where you're going to land in there as well. And we're looking at how that works here as we close up. Matthew chapter 18, verses 1 through 4. At the same time came the disciples unto Jesus, saying, Who is greatest in the kingdom of heaven? And Jesus called a little child on them and sat him in the midst of them, and said, Verily I say unto you, except you be converted and become as little children, you shall not enter into the kingdom of heaven. Whosoever therefore shall humble himself as a little child, the same is greatest in the kingdom of heaven. Okay, so we're arguing about who's going to be great, right? And who's Yeshua say? Notice, converted and becomes a little child. And he's talking to people who have the right ancestry, who are actually physical descendants of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, who are part of the people of Israel. And yet he's telling them they have to be converted. Converted what? To another religion? No, converted their heart. As we looked at before, God says converted. We convert sinners to believers. People, we're not called to circumcised people. We're not converting people to be Jews. We're not converting Jews to be Gentiles. Then conversion here means a little child. What makes you a child? Humbling yourself. Humility. Moses, who we looked at, was called the most humble man on earth. Yet he went to Pharaoh and said, Let my people go with boldness. Humility has nothing to do with a lack of boldness. Humility, biblical humility, is you're willing to submit yourself to God, to lower yourself. And the ultimate example of that is Yeshua himself, who humbled himself in obedience, even to the death on the cross. So if you want to be great, which kingdom you're in, the kingdom that's above all our kingdoms, or one of those other kingdoms determined by what you do the law, but where you are in whichever kingdom you're in is determined by two things, and here's the first one. How much did you keep yourself humble in this life? in obedience to God. And being humble to God may mean you may have to be bold with people who are trying to get you to do contrary to what God says. You may have to be in their face like Moses was with Pharaoh. It has nothing to do with milk toasty and all that nonsense people say in this effort to feminize, to give feminine characteristics to people in the Bible and the meanings of the words in the Bible. It's about being humble before God and obeying him in everything. How far are you willing to go in being obedient to God? That's going to determine how high you're going to go in his kingdom. And here's the other thing. And here's a most practical way of how this can be put into practice. Mark 9:34-35. But they held their way by the way they disputed among themselves who should be greatest. He sat them down, called the 12, and said to them, if any man desires to be first, the same should be last and servant of all. And he goes on to say, who wants to be greatest in God's kingdom must be servant, must be the servant of all. So in the kingdom, you're going to be servant of all if you're going to push and demand your own way in this world. If you want everyone serving you, this blink that we call life, a blink compared to eternity, you're going to be at the bottom. You're going to be at the bottom. You're going to be at the bottom. Yeah, you're going to be in the kingdom. But now you may be in the kingdom within the kingdom, but you're going to be in the bottom. You're going to be in the bottom of that kingdom. You're going to be a servant of all. You're going to be. I don't know exactly what that look like. Then the reign of Messiah, somebody's going to keep the streets cleaned and stuff. I mean, you're going to be in that. You're going to be down that group or whatever you think the lowest position is. Yeah, you're going to be the kingdom, but you're going to be at the bottom of it, We're in charge of the least thing, or, given the least responsibility. Because remember, authority, greatest, we're talking about authority, really, when you're talking about the kingdom. But if you want to be great in that kingdom, have great authority, you have to do the opposite. In this blink, you got to serve other people. Got to serve them all. You want to serve them all. Even as Yeshua demonstrated himself, bowing down and washing the feet of the disciples. The job of the lowest slave. He took on the position of the lowest man on the totem pole to show us how we can be great in his kingdom. And it is equal opportunity for all. And these people are who we should be looking for to be able to exhibit these last two characteristics in particular. Humble before God. Obedience before God. Humble before God. And humble before God and obedience, and who are servants of all. Those are the people who have the right heart to be in these positions I'm going to talk about. I talked about the elders. I'm going to look at some others in the future. And everyone has equal opportunity to exhibit these positions. And for my own self, I try my best to do these things because I observe the saddle and stuff because I want to be in the kingdom where Messiah is. I want to be high in it, not so much for the gifts and the fancier mansion or whatever the case may be, because I just want to be as close to him as possible. If he's King of Kings, I want to be as close to him as possible. And I'm willing to do whatever I can to get me a better position that gets me closer to him. I mean, if he didn't live there and lived in a cave, I'd still want to do the same thing. But there's equal opportunity for all of us under the law, under God's law. That's all I have for this week. Until next week, shalom.